So you have a non-hand question, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I thought it was interesting given that we're in a pandemic and there's a lot of home games, so I just wanted to run this by you.
Okay.
So I am primarily a 2-3 no limit player in SoCal, and because of the pandemic, the home games are typically 5-5,
Right. Okay.
and my bankroll is around 17.5K. So my question is in regards to the buy-in for these 5-5 home games.
Mm-hmm.
They're typically 200 to 1,000, but usually it's uncapped.
Okay.
So there's a lot of shallower stacks because it's pretty mixed player pool.
Uh-huh.
So people usually buy in for 3 to 500. I was wondering, given my bankroll, what I should be buying in for from a comfortability standpoint and from a GTO standpoint, I
From a GTO standpoint.
guess.
Well, you said the buy-in is what, 300 to 1,000, sort of like casino 5-5 games in the
Yeah,
home
exactly.
games? But you are primarily a 2-3 player, which when we're from LA, we usually sort of think about it. It's kind of weird, the buy-ins. Like if you ever, I'd always find it funny when people come out of town and they play in LA casinos
Yeah.
because in Commerce they're like, what's 500 no limit? What's 600 no limit? They don't do it by blinds. 500 no limit is 510. Well, actually, 500 no limit is 500 to 1500, 510, unless they've changed something. And then they have a 300 to 500 game. But what really confuses people is the 600 game, which is actually 1020 uncapped. And the reason why it's a 600 min is because back in 2003, 2004, when they were trying to get no limit popular from TV, they wanted people from limit to come over so that they could buy in for the minimum. But when you say 2-3, that sounds to me like you're playing a 100 to a 300 cap game. Is that in the casinos?
Yeah, exactly. Like Elsinore, Pachanga, those kind of. So and if I play in LA, I play at the Gardens, and I play the 300 min max game.
300 min max. I mean, obviously you're not. I mean, so when you say bankroll, I assume you have a job because it's really difficult to make a living playing in those games with the rake structure. I mean, I always talk about how really the first level, you got to get up to the $5 blind in LA because it's a flat drop, which means that they take
Hmm.
6 or 7 off the top. So I'm assuming that you have a job, right?
Well, I did, and then
Oh,
pandemic hit me. But yeah, it's completely separate from life roll and all that.
yeah.
So
I
I
mean,
just do this for supplemental income.
right, supplemental income. So you can be much, much more aggressive with your bankroll if it's supplemental income. When people talk about risk of ruin and, oh, what's my bankroll supposed to be? It's going to be way, way different for someone who's playing poker full time, doesn't have a job. You have to start looking at like, living expenses, things like that, 6 to 12 month living expenses. But if you don't have any of those other things and you have another source of income, especially if you can dip back into some other money, now, I'm not suggesting, for example, if you have a mortgaging your house, but when you say 17.5K, but that doesn't really mean anything if you can always sort of dip into other money, whether even if it's liquidating investments or just being able to draw out from other money does not mean that you're broke if you lose the 17.5K. Now, a lot of people have made the argument to me, well, it's sort of a mental thing. Like I don't want to necessarily, lose the bankroll. You can be much more aggressive. To be perfectly honest with you, if you're winning at a $300 cap game at a decent clip, and I mean a decent clip being like 25 bucks an hour over like, 1,000 hours, something like that, which I think would be really, really good, then you should be moving up to $5 blind anyways. I mean, I maybe I just ran really well. I never had a downswing above like say 15,000 at 510, 1,500 cap at Commerce. I would go up to 1020 and I would have 30 or 40K downswings. And that's when I was like, well, you know, I don't want to deal with these downswings and win like 10, 20% more. But I think it without, I mean, to have 17.5K and it's not really your bankroll, like in terms of you're not going to go broke, you should, yeah, absolutely, you can play 5-5. You should be playing 5-5 anyways. So that's number one. I know that's not what your question is, but you're probably going to have more of a bankroll than 80% of the players that are playing 5-5 at, in casinos. So, when you talk about a home game, I always give this sort of advice, especially in LA, because of course that's where I cut my teeth. Get up to the $5 blind level as quickly as possible. It looks like you don't have a choice because it's a home game. You don't have to buy in for 1,000 at first. You can even buy in for the minimum. You can buy in for 300. This is what I always say. Listen, like when you get up to a level where you're like, all right, I'm going to be playing in this game, but I want to get used to it. I want to sort of dip my, gain my confidence, get my feet wet a little bit. You can even buy in for the minimum for a few weeks or say like 5 to 10 sessions. This is what I used to tell my private students too. You're going to see very, very quickly that the guys aren't much better than what you're accustomed to. And also, too, there's actually a fair amount of profitability short stacking those games. You're not going to make as much money as you are if you were to say buy in for the full amount. But from what you would see in a home game when people are opening super large and playing way, way too many hands, re-raising over the top. If somebody's opening to more than say like 5x, which I assume in those games, and you're going to buy in for 300, you probably shouldn't be flat calling at all. It should be pretty much, three better folding almost all the time, which is a very profitable strategy. But I think the point is gain your confidence, buy in from 300 to 500, get your feet wet a little bit, and then start buying in for more, if you want to. You always have to watch the rake in those games, though, too, in home games. Like, what are these guys raking?
Yeah, they're pretty ridiculous. One of them is $15, 10% up to $15, and the other one is pretty awesome. It's $15 every hour per player.
Oh, that's pretty good. Anytime you can do a time collection, because that's going to be way cheap.
Strong.
That's way, way cheaper than your casino when you're paying $6 or $7 flat. Because if you win like
Absolutely,
2 or 3 pots, I mean, that's going to be $20 an hour right there. The whole 10% up to 15, I always wonder about that because there are so many small pots. Here's the thing. 10% rake up to $15 would probably be a better structure at the games that you play in the casino at 2-3 than what they actually have at the casino. If you were to say, hey, Bart, would you rather play 2-3?
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, would you rather play 2-3, 300 cap at $6 a hand or 10% up to 15? It would be 10% up to 15 without a doubt. Once you start getting up to 5-5, though, I don't know the average pot size. What are people opening to?
Okay, so the time rate game is a really good game, and it turns into like $5, $10, $25 minimum min straddle, but they're like throwing out 200 blind, and it gets pretty wild. So average pot size is tough to determine, but I would just say on like a normal night, let's say in the beginning of the night, it's about, I'd say 350.
What, I mean, what are people the open size? Excuse me, the open raise size.
Open size, yeah. Anywhere from 25 to 35.
Okay, so average. That's what I'm trying to figure out, because if the open size is 25 to 35, then you're going to hit that amount where if you get one caller, like if the average pot size is like 90 or 100 going to the flop, every time you see post flop, that's a lot of money because they're going to be taking $10 a hand. So, I think you have to like kind of factor that in a little bit, but I know that wasn't your question. I mean, I still think that game's beatable if it's really good, but I think that you should get as comfortable as you possibly can, whatever the means are to do that. And that might be by buying in a little bit short at first. You will quickly realize, especially if you're sort of student in the game and you're a winning player at those lower levels of the casinos, that these guys suck. And I think it's really sort of a confidence issue because, people could be like, well, buy in for 100 blinds. Well, the thing about buying in for 100 blinds is that, even though 500 at 5-5 is technically 100 blinds, it's not 100 blinds traditionally like people think. I would almost think that more like 140 blind buy-in math-wise is like 100 blind live buy-in because of the open size, because of the 5x open size, because the pots, it's just the SPR post. So that's where sort of that's where I would say like 700 would be sort of equivalent to almost like online, like, buying in for 100 blinds, if not more, and maybe even 750. But you don't have to. And the other thing though, too, I got to tell you, Joe, is that, I mean, I've seen so many live hands and I've played so much 5-5 and 5-10. I can count the number of guys on one hand in 15 years that ever gave me fits, that I was ever concerned about, that ever had position on me when we were deep stacked. in No Limit Hold'em. And it never happened at 5-5. And I've watched people play for tens of thousands of hours in commentary. There isn't going to be a person that's going to be playing a home game in LA at 5-5 that you need to be intimidated by, by buying in for 1,000. Oh, like John Smith over there, he's got 2,000. I can't buy in like deep because he's going to give me a headache. It's just not going to happen. You can believe me or not, but it's that's why I think you should get comfortable, up to a certain point. But I would come away with this as a same thing with everyone else out there that doesn't really play poker for a living, which I think is a good idea. I always think that poker should be like supplemental income. Maybe it's something you enjoy. You go play golf as a hobby, it costs money, right? Unless you're gambling on it and you win. You can do that. But poker is like, oh, that's a fun thing where I could actually make some money too. I could make like 10, 15, 20,000, playing like 50, 100 hours, 50 hours a month, something like that extra. Go on a couple trips, family trips. It's a great thing, right? But you don't have to be so conservative with, whatever you define as your bankroll when you have some of that other stuff. But maybe you can give us a call in a couple months and report back.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Real quick, as far as the backing portion of my,
oh, that's right. I forgot.
Question.
Yes. What was your second question? Go ahead.
I have a couple players that I think they believe I'm a good, like 1-3 crusher kind of guy. Like I have $33 an hour is my rate in 1-3, and that's over just shy of 700 hours.
Like at gardens and stuff. Like at gardens.
Yeah, mostly Pachanga actually.
Okay,
Pachanga. There.
Okay, yeah.
So these guys play 2-5. They see me in the 1-3 and like, okay, Joe knows what he's doing in 1-3. So they say, hey, I'll take 50% of your action in these bigger home games. I'll take 25% of your action. It's not like a full-on contract staking deal, but it's kind of, I'll hit them up if the game's huge, because buying in that shallow in a huge game towards the end of the night is just a terrible idea in my opinion.
Joe, I'm going to give you some. I'm going to give you some of the best advice anybody can give you when it comes to this type of thing.
All right, let's go.
Don't do it. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Not only are you usually dealing with the scum of the earth when it comes to a lot of poker players and things like that, it will always end messy. And I've always said, and no one can ever give me the right answer. How is it? And this is recently too, by the way, because the sort of main event at the World Series is going on online or some bullshit like that. And there's been a little bit of, comes in waves, right? There's been a little controversy about like how much people are charging in markup and stuff like that. How is it you as a winning cash game player, these guys know that you are a winning cash game player, right? They're going to take a piece of your action and you're not going to mark up your action? How is it that people get to mark up their tournament stuff when no one even knows if they're a winner, and you as an established winning cash game player, you're going to sell at face? You're not going to mark up? It is the dumbest thing I have ever heard of. And I would always shoo people away because I'd get the same offers sometimes too. People like playing 10-20. Hey, Bart, you want to go play 20-40? I'll take half your action. I'm like, why would I play at 20-40 for 50% of my action when I can play at 10-20 for 100% of my action? Unless somehow the game was just like off the charts good. But you have enough money where you don't need to sell your action. You're not broke. So it's a bad idea, number one. And why do these guys get to buy your action? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, in order for somebody to be able to buy your action, or for it to make sense that, your buddy's going to buy half your action without markup, are you going to be able to win twice as much per hour in that larger game than you're going to win in the smaller game with 100% of your action? I mean, that's really what the math equation is. Now, it could be that extreme down sort of at the lower stakes, but it's certainly not like that at like when people were like, 5-10 to 10-20 at Commerce. I'm not going to win twice as much as I'm going to win at 5-10 and 10-20. Usually when you move up, the stakes get harder. So why would I sell somebody my action? It just doesn't, it makes absolutely no sense. Besides the fact that it's just going to cause problems. So, like I said, you're calling in for this. I'd forgotten that you want to talk about. You're calling in for this. It can only end bad. And why do you need to sell your action to these guys, right? And again, I just don't
Yeah,
understand
yeah,
how it is sort of come about where people get to sell their tournaments for markup.
yeah. That's ridiculous. Yeah, that's a good point.
But winning cash game players are going to sell at face. And talk about the less variant route. Who's going to win more often? I mean, you're going to lose most of the time in tournaments, right?
No, absolutely.
So, I mean, that's
That's a
my
good
take.
point. Yeah, I should preface this by just saying that these two guys I look up to them as players, and they're friends more than anything. So I'm not dealing with like random guys.
Okay, fair
But
enough.
I think they're just being like nice, and I talk hand history with them, and like, hey, I think they ask too, like, hey, do you want? I'll take 50% of action. I could just politely decline, So maybe I'll just.
I mean,
start doing that.
the other thing too, especially with the way that a lot of like these games are going, quasi-private games, even private games in casinos, which a lot of the pros bitch about, and it's usually the pros that aren't really necessarily good for the game. If you get into a game, a lot of times you have to sell your action to the host because that's the only way you can get into the game. So that's like one of those sort of directions where it's going. Like, say you got into a really juicy game and you knew a host that was going to say, hey, Joe, you want to play? A lot of times you'd have to sell your action to the guy, or give him a piece of your winnings. It's the same shit. Well, piece of your winnings is even worse because he's not taking any of the risk. But I don't think that that's really happening like at that level. Now, if you want to do it just as a friendly thing and you think that some of these guys are positive influences, why can't you swap with them instead? Why do they? Well, swapping. I'll take that back. If you're playing in
Like I
the
take
same
their action too.
games, well, swapping is basically like, okay, we're gonna play, and then, you know, we're sort of cross like 20%, meaning that like, if someone has a bad day, someone has a winning day, you sort of net it. But that can sometimes cause some issues though too if you're playing at the same table. But I'm always like, I like to swap in those types of situations as opposed to like, someone necessarily buying my action. But you have the same problem if someone's buying your action and they're playing in the game with you too, right? If you're
No,
playing,
exactly, and
if
that's
you're
usually
sitting
the
next
case.
to a guy and he's got half your action, that's a problem too. That can
Yeah,
be a problem too. So I think
yeah, it gets
that's
awkward when we get in hands.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that swapping
So
is sort of swapping a little bit less is a better route than that. But I mean, I think that you've got plenty of money and you're in a really good spot to be in. But I appreciate the call. Thank you
all
very
right,
much.
cool.
All right.
Thanks, Bart.
All
Appreciate
right,
it.
great. If you like what you've seen here, please hit the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this call in hand, hit the like button down below. To check out crushlivepoker.com, click on the link in the description. Use the code YTA300 to get the first 30 days for free.